You're listening to Parents You've Got This, the expert guide to parenthood.
The complete guide to pregnancy, birth, baby and parenthood. This podcast is brought to you by Parents You've Got This and proudly supported by Mistela. Mistela is a natural origin skincare for babies and children, recommended by healthcare professionals. Mistela by Parents' Side since 1950.
Around 30% of all marriages end in divorce, which is really tricky, particularly when you have children. So today on the Expert Guide to Parenthood podcast, we're going to be giving you our tips and tricks on how to make this situation a little bit easier.
We're joined today by child psychologist Deirdre Brandner. Deirdre Brandner has decades of experience working with parents and children right through their early childhood years, right through the teenage years. You might recognise her from national TV. She is an amazing spokeswoman on a whole lot of number of issues that are facing children, and she's really well placed today to talk to us all about this really challenging topic. Hi Dee, thanks so much for being with us.
Hi.
Now, divorce and separation is obviously something that no one wants. Can we talk a little bit about when it's better to stay in a relationship and try and make it work for the sake of the children, and when it's better for the children that, you know, steps are taken and, you know, separation and ultimately divorce is looked at?
You know, that is such a relevant question and such a difficult question for so many parents. What research tells us, though, is that children are very aware of when their parents aren't happy. And we know that children thrive when their parents are doing well. So as much as we think that we're putting on, you know, a good front, or we're just going to get through it for the kids, we know that long term, delaying the inevitable, delaying the healing is really unhealthy for kids. And actually, we're showing them modelling unhealthy relationships and us not being true to ourselves. So as difficult as this journey is, there's no evidence that suggests that we should be staying in a relationship that's not working.
How do children typically perceive divorce and separation?
Look, that happens at different stages of their development because cognitively, when they're able to cope with information, depends on how they perceive it. Young children can really struggle because they don't understand the concept of divorce. I mean, you know, mum and dad, they were forever and now they're not. So are they divorcing from me or divorcing from the two of them? For primary school age children, very caught up in wrong and right. Whose fault is it? Who's to blame? Because when there's any conflict in a friendship or relationship that they know of, something's gone wrong. And that's how they understand it. So it's really important, most of all, that we assure children no one's at fault. And for teens, well, their perception about divorce is very emotional. It's about a loss, it's about grief, but it's also, because of the age they're at, very much about how is this going to affect me? Because, you know, teenage years are a lot about their sense of self and identity. So it really depends on the age of the child.
And in that 2D, and guessing that it's going to be similar in terms of the different ages, but how can we expect children to react in these sort of situations?
It's really telling to think about even babies, infants, whilst no concept of what divorce or separation is, children, babies from a young age are very in tune with the stress of parents. So we would expect some changes in a baby's behaviour even, easily more difficult to settle, more clingy. We know with toddlers, they're used to having things go the same. So when there is adjusting to mum not being there, dad not being there, living in a different setting, those things can really throw them. And we can see maybe some regression in some behaviours. That does resume normality in a couple of months. For primary school age children, very varied. Anger, grief, some acting out, some behaviour issues, sometimes some being withdrawn. And we really need to be supportive of our children in that time, because they didn't choose this, and often they're not choosing their behaviour. It's the way they're going about processing this. And teenagers, we know that this is a difficult time for communication generally. So a lot of them will use information and conversation as a bit of a weapon for them processing this. So you might get lots of eye rolls, back chat, things said that are unkind, or you'll get absolutely nothing. So understanding that children will choose to process this in their own time and in their own way, and no judgment about that, but please be rest assured that we know that things do reset in a couple of months.
And so if you do decide that, you need to separate or get divorced, how do you go about telling the children?
I think this is one of the worst conversations that parents ever have to have, and my heart goes out to them. And my role in my clinic over the years has been giving parents the tools that will minimise the emotional overload and feel like they have a plan. And that's actually what we need parents to do. I need parents to sit down together and work out how and when they're going to tell the child. It is better if both parents can be there. Sometimes that's not always possible. So our recommendation is the parent that's spending the most amount of time with the child should be the one that does the explaining. It's very important that in that moment that we don't overload our children with information. They don't need a big dialogue about how, why, when this all happened. We have to keep our own emotions in check. No matter what you feel about your partner that you're separating from, that can't be part of this discussion. We need to only give them the information that they need at that time. One of the most important things kids will want to know is a timeline. When is this happening? Which house am I going to live in? For them, what matters to them most. The language I often recommend that families use when they're talking with their children is, Mum and Dad were together because we loved each other so much and we had you as a family and we still love you so much. Our love for you has not changed, but Mum and Dad find it very difficult to be together at the moment, so they're going to be choosing to live separately. And that's sort of keeping that concise, consistent language and changing it to the cognitive or developmental level of your child is what's really important here.
And so, Dee, after having that really difficult conversation, how do you suggest that families then keep the communication lines open with their child at those different ages to make sure that, the child can discuss how they're feeling about it and, that you're able to answer any questions and provide the support they need as you go along?
Mentioning that communication is absolutely critical to how children are going to navigate this moment. And I do know as a parent, I'm really asking you to work really hard in these moments at a time as a parent that you're probably facing the most stress there is. So I know it's a big ask, but I know long term, and research supports this, that communicating with our children in an open manner, letting them have their feelings, acknowledge their feelings. We want our children to feel safe talking to us about how sad they are, how upset they are, how angry they are. We need to say that is okay to have that feeling. I think sometimes when we see our children really struggling emotionally, we want to rush in and cheer them up and fix it. And we need to honour our child's feelings. By rushing in and trying to cheer them up, we're actually suppressing their feelings. We have to let them have those feelings. And also, we need to let our children know that no matter what they're feeling, how upset they are, they don't have to hold that together so Mum and Dad don't feel bad. That can be tough for children. Children need to know that you are the adult. You are going to be okay. Okay? As a family, we have still got this parent-child connection.
And how long does that typically take for a child to start coping with the fact that they're getting divorced? Or are there signs that you think, okay, I might need to get some help for my child?
Look, we would expect a fair degree of overt behavioural difficulties or emotional outbursts for at least a couple of months. Often I'm asked, well, when do I need to seek additional support? I would say that if you are seeing behaviours in your child that are at odds with how they used to be for longer than 6 months, And if those behaviours are affecting things like sleeping, eating, going on play dates, wanting to go to sporting events, trouble with schoolwork, they're sort of the symptoms that, hang on a minute, it might be really helpful to get some support for my little one to help them navigate this path.
How about preparing children or helping children to adjust to two different homes, Dee, and perhaps, two very different parenting styles?
I think, I'm always a psychologist on about consistency, but remember, we can have the same expectations in each household without having the same rules. And children get used to adapting to different rules. I mean, rules are different at school than they are at home, and our kids cope with that. Knowing, though, what the rules or boundaries are in each home is the most important part. But I will say to every parent, you can only manage the children when they are in your care, and you need to have your own boundaries and expectations of what you deem as appropriate for your home. And if mum or dad have different rules in their house, we have to accept that. The same way as, we accept that, there's different rules at dancing, there's different rules in the classroom. So consistency within the home is the key. You can't be in two places at once.
No, that's so true, and that must be really hard for parents if you know that certain behaviours are going to end up in certain behaviours for their children, like staying up late, that they're going to be tired, and potentially they go to the one parent's house and they're allowed to stay up night, and they come to you and they're really tired. That must be really hard for parents to navigate that. How do you go about navigating that? Is it communication with your partner about the effects, or do you just have to accept that there's two different rules at two different houses?
Oh, look, that's a great question, and it's so common. We know the key to minimising emotional impact on children as a result of divorce. The most critical factor is calm communication between parents. And look, I know that is never the easiest. I mean, going through this as a parent, as a mum or dad, but mostly as a male or a female, is really difficult. So trying to keep our emotions in check when we're communicating is super helpful. So some people find written communication easier, but we need to be careful because sometimes our tone's not always very clearly evident when it's written communication. So that's the first thing. The second thing is it's really important that we're not saying negative things about our partner or their parenting style in front of our own children. We do not want our children having to feel that they have to form an alliance with one parent or the other. Or, Mum, I know you hate when Dad does this. Or, Dad, I know you think Mum's dreadful when she does this. We don't want our kids having to be exposed to that. So where possible, having communication about, I'm trying to get the children into early on Sunday nights. They've got a big week. What do you think we could try? I think keeping it open-ended and light is really important. But look, I'm being honest here, it's a tough gig. It really is difficult.
And another tough one, Dee, is the introduction of a new partner, perhaps.
Yes.
So what are the do's and don'ts around that?
Well, that is probably, my responses to this may not be very happy for lots of people, but they are based on best practice for the child.
Yeah.
And it's based on research, and it's not just something that us child psychologists come up with. But we know that a relationship between you and your new partner should be at least 8 to 12 months before we start integrating that person into your child's life. Most importantly, I hear when we think about the introduction, your ex-partner needs to know that that's going to happen. The way that starts should be gradual. It should occur in a neutral place. And we shouldn't initially expect our children to spend much time with the new partner. It's really important to remember that, I welcome that we want to move on into new relationships and find love again, and we all want that. And I often have my clients tell me, but I want my kids to see me happy again. I want Dad to see happy again. And it can be really hard to keep reminding yourself as a parent that our kids were happy when Mum and Dad were together. And it's going to take them a while to adjust to that. The other thing that I often hear is, but I don't want to wait to every second weekend to have time with my new partner. I want to see more of them. And I want to see my new partner when I'm with my kids. So I'm going to suggest to you that initially you need to keep it for those off weekends. Your child did not choose divorce. They did not choose this. We have to make our children our number one priority. And I know that can be a really bitter pill to swallow, but you need to know that as a child psychologist, I'm coming from the place of evidence and research in this area and what we know works. And, we know that in partners, when you've repartnered, parenting can be an absolute joy. But that person in your life is never going to replace mum or dad. And you have to be really clear in your communication about that. They might be like an aunt, like an uncle, like a really special friend. And I think making sure our children are aware that we are the focus is critical.
What are the long-term effects of divorce on children?
So what we know is that most children will cope with divorce. And what I mean by that, most children, it's those that would have struggled with many other situations. There's lots of variables to consider, and it's not just the factor of divorce that impacts a child wellbeing. We know that it takes time, and that families will heal, and that generally things will resume to whatever the norm is for family. But as long as our children are supported, they're removed from conflict, and they see their parents communicating calmly and clearly. And lastly, children do better when they've got some say. So they might not get to choose all the rules about how much time they spend at mum's or how much time they spend at dad's, but they might have some ownership over situations like, Mum, I'd like to celebrate my birthday like this year. So those small things can go such a long way to helping children cope with divorce.
What about when children are talking perhaps to other children about, the weekend and, let's organise a play, but it might be complicated with living arrangements and where they're going to be. What are some tools that we can give our children to navigate these sorts of conversations with their peers?
Obviously age dependent, and sometimes for younger children it might be that, the language around, I have two homes, I have mum's home and dad's home, so you'll need to speak with my mum and or my dad. So that's why, the great thing about technology nowadays is we can do that communicating. One of the things that's really important to consider is that divorce, while it's sad that is becoming increasingly common, it does mean it's not, the thing that was so foreign as it was once before. And children nowadays are often really comfortable with the idea that their friend might be living in two houses or might only see their dads or their mums on the weekend. So giving them the language to talk to their friends, keeping it simple, and for those all-important arrangements, redirecting that towards mum and dad to help organise.
Well, Dee, thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge and experience in helping families navigate the trickiness of divorce.
A huge thanks to Mistela for sponsoring this episode. Mistela empowers parents throughout their parenting journey with education and honest conversations from pregnancy and beyond. Mistela has plenty of parenting articles and resources on their website. Visit mistela.com.au. You've been listening to the Expert Guide to Parenthood podcast. Never forget, parents.
You've got this.
Join a Parents You've Got This masterclass today to be prepared, excited and educated for pregnancy, birth, baby and parenthood. Visit www.parentsyou'vegotthis.com.au and sign up for a masterclass today.
The information provided in this podcast is general in nature and is intended to support, not replace, a discussion with your doctor or healthcare professional. Parents You've Got This take no responsibility for any medical decisions made by individuals based on the information provided in this podcast.